All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to the inaugural webcast of the Synthesis series. My name is Eric Cavanaugh. I will be your moderator for a jam-packed program today, folks. I'm really excited about this. It's a whole new series that is being put together by the Bloor Group in conjunction with Eckerson Group. I've known Wayne Eckerson for many, many years, and he and I have had some great conversations about how to generate cool, interesting research and content, and that's what you're going to see today. So here's a slide about our presenters. Yours truly at the top. I'll be the moderator and / analyst. We have Steve Smith of the Eckerson Group, a data science expert. We have Dwayne Washington, a.k.a. the BI Pharaoh of business intelligence expertise. And we have Praveen Kankaria of Impetus Technologies, who's going to give us some industry perspective. So the topic today is a little bit controversial. Is the traditional data warehouse dead? Well, we have different viewpoints on that, and the whole idea of synthesis is that we're going to have a conversation about it. So the point will be brought by Stephen Smith, the counterpoint by Dwayne, synthesis by yours truly, and then some industry perspective by Praveen. And by the way, folks, you can play an integral part in this whole process by sharing your perspective. So feel free to use the Q&A component of your webcast console down in the bottom right-hand corner, or chat yours truly throughout this event. And feel free to email us, too. This is going to be an ongoing dialectic, as they call it. That's the Hegelian concept for philosophical discussion. The idea is we're not debating so much as we are engaging in dialogue, and we're trying to understand what is the difference between a data warehouse and a data lake. Are these competitive technologies? Are they collaborative technologies? Complementary technologies? I think that's going to be what we determine in the synthesis, but we'll see. We try to keep an open mind throughout these events, and that's the whole idea. So feel free to, like I say, chat us up or send us a question in the Q&A component of the webcast console. We will have an audience Q&A at the end of this event. And let's go ahead and dive right in. So I'll just say very quickly, I've been tracking data warehousing now for almost 20 years, and it really has revolutionized how companies use data. But old-fashioned, if you will, traditional data warehousing is fairly intensive. It's fairly expensive. The solutions tend to be somewhat brittle because of all the ETL processes that get baked in. And let's face it, the data warehouse was designed in an era that had different constraints than we have today. Processors were pretty slow, relatively speaking, 20 years ago. Storage was expensive. The pipes were thin. The network pipes that data moves through were thin. Well, all that has changed now. Processors are extremely fast. We have very cheap storage, and of course the pipes are now nice and fat. So you can move data around, and things have really changed. So in the data lake, by and large, you keep the data where it lives, and you access it. Things like schema on read, we'll hear about that today. So what's really going on here? And of course in data warehousing itself, there has been very significant innovation over the last handful of years, largely because of the cloud, quite frankly. So things are changing. We're going to try to give you as much perspective as we can. And to start us off, I'm going to bring in the heavyweight, calling in from his corner in Boston, Stephen Smith of Eckerson Group. Let me hand you the keys to the WebEx. There you are. And take it away, Stephen Smith.
Thanks so much, Eric. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. I guess across the country, maybe around the world. Glad to be here. Again, my name is Steve Smith, and I'm the Research Director for Data Science at the Eckerson Group. And for people not familiar with Eckerson Group, we are maybe a considered very focused version of, say, Gartner. We're an analyst, and our laser focus is on analytics. BI, data science, machine learning, predictive analytics, and the data management that is required to support those technologies. So just to get a little credibility for folks who don't know me, I have been in this space a long time. I cut my teeth at a massively parallel computing company called Thinking Machines back in the 90s, and we built one of the first MPT large databases. We messed around with column store databases very early on, and we're the owners of the world's fastest internal and external sorting projects that I was involved with. I also then moved on to a OLAP, what was a multidimensional database OLAP company called Pilot Software. People may remember that. It sort of still exists today, but not really, never became like as big as Cognos or MicroStrategies. But we integrated data science with relational databases and with OLAP, which is kind of a first. And we built a product there for building a data warehouse for predicting churn in the mobile phone industry. I then went on to found a company called Optus, and we built large data warehouses in the direct marketing space for pharmaceuticals. So at one time, we were the owner of the world's largest allergy sufferers database. Very exciting stuff. So I've had a lot of experience and got to see as the technologies have evolved, everything from being way ahead of the curve back in the 90s, the thinking machines day, to current day, seeing all the progress we've made with the cloud. So this story is one of, I think it kind of kicked off by a blog article I wrote half a year or so ago, where just to be controversial, I'm like, well, do we need the data warehouse anymore now that we have the data lake? And I just took the tack of trying to just make an argument that we didn't need the data warehouse, to be controversial but also to be extreme. But I think I backed it up with some good arguments. So I'll kick it off here. My position is the traditional data warehouse is dead. And to answer that question, let me give it an emphatic, no doubt about it. If I can get the slide to go. Oh, yes. So I think things have significantly changed, as Eric has mentioned. And if we look at the state of the world, say in the 1990s, so the 1990s, a very interesting time. Dr. Edgar F Codd had come up with a relational database model. Larry Ellison had then, with Oracle, had then taken that and productionized it. And it was an amazing breakthrough, right? It allowed us to do OLTP as a huge improvement over flat files and hierarchical network databases at the time. But it really wasn't meant to support, to do decision support. So the problem that the data warehouse was supposed to solve in the 1990s, and what Mr. Inman came up with at that time, was the problems of we were redundantly calculating the same reports. The data was out there, but it was designed to be put into tables, which were great for individual updates and transactions, but not great for pulling lots of extracts out all at once. People were redundantly storing the same data. So everybody was doing the same report pull, same data calculations over and over again. It just wasn't efficient. Number three, this is the big one. Still happens today, I would argue, almost everywhere. Everywhere I go when I'm doing consulting projects, I hear of CEOs getting reports, and there are three different numbers for revenue. Basic KPIs are still being calculated in different ways by different groups. And this was certainly a problem that data warehouse was going to solve. The other problem, of course, is the transactional system is not optimized for doing aggregation and getting kind of answers the reports need, so there are long waits. And the other problem was that if you had a transactional system and you happened to just do a query on it that took a couple of days, that wasn't just going to bring down the reporting for everybody else, that was going to probably stop your business dead in its tracks for a little bit. So there's really a very good need for something like data warehousing at that time. And there was a lot of cool ideas going on there. Column-based databases were being built, and all kinds of denormalization was being done to optimize, as well as, say, OLAP multidimensional databases. But if we think about it, despite the name data warehouse, really what was the promise of the data warehouse? And I like this picture because, to me, it kind of summarizes what the promise is supposed to be. Everything neatly packed together. Maybe you have robots getting your data for you. Everything is organized. It's kind of analogous to a library, but data warehouse is a much cooler term, so data warehouse stuck. But it's really about solving the problems with access. I know the data is out there, but can I get at it? Data warehouse is going to do that for me. It's going to do it quickly, pre-computed values, and it's going to have a single version of the truth to solve that problem of the CEO getting three different answers. So that was the promise, and The reality, however, was quite different. First of all, no one agreed on the truth. So I think part of the thinking behind the data warehouse is if we create the right data model, we get the right database, we have the right technology, we can put it all in one place, and we can solve all those problems. The problem was that single version of the truth was not a technology problem, it was not a database problem, it was a business problem. It was a problem of getting people together in the same room to agree what revenue, customer, profit all really meant. And that's still a problem today. And I think it was missed by the folks who were focused on building a big technological monolithic data warehouse. Now, the other problem with the data warehouse was that it was never quite the data that you needed. You would do an extract of the data, build a cube, and then almost invariably you'd fall off the edge of the cube just as you're doing something interesting. You drill down, slice and dice, and just as you're about to zero in on something interesting, you fall off the bottom and you couldn't get any more information. And in some ways, data warehousing were victims of their own success because you wouldn't have known the right questions to ask until you'd actually seen what was in the data. And the data warehouse and the reporting systems of the time provided that. But it was a big problem nonetheless. And the other reality is that the data warehouse wasn't a static thing that could be designed once, but there was new data always arriving. Now, it seems like we're kind of in a Cambrian explosion of new data sources right now. You know, video, JSON files, audio, image, text, all these things were just foreign concepts to be put into a database, you know, 15, 20 years ago. But remember, 15, 20 years ago, also, there was this explosion of this thing called the Internet and these strange things called log files and clickstream data, which never had been seen before. So I don't know what the new data sources are going to be, but I know there are going to be new data sources, and it's always going to be a problem for a data warehouse. Number 4 there is probably the most extreme argument, but I would say that no data warehouse was ever finished. Mostly because philosophically, even though the data warehouse was presented as a thing to be built and completed, the reality is the data warehouse is really a process. To be successful, it's something that constantly needs to be modified and agilely adapting to the business. And as Eric mentioned, it's extremely brittle with regards to change. So what's going on today? Why is it? Wow, what is different today? Well, number 1, the pace of new data creation has truly increased. I mean, there's never been anything like this. The amounts of data that are being presented and need to be stored. There's you know no concept even of what it means to store a video in a typical relational database of 5 years ago. This is a big change. The weight of bureaucracies has increased. That's just the nature of bureaucracies. IT gets a little bit more sluggish. There's not enough feedback to have the customers tell the creators of the data warehouse what they want, how they want it to change. And the importance of agility has increased. So in the past, in Codd's day, saving disk space was the most important thing you could do. Today, reacting quickly to data, sometimes at the millisecond level, is absolutely key to the success of your business, and that is a fundamental change from the way things used to be. Of course, disks are cheap, storage is plentiful, and data access speeds have tremendously increased. So having to put all the data in one place that's close by is not as important because you can get at it quickly because of the underlying technology. So my simple solution is, hey, let's use the data lake for access. Let's rely on NPP, shared nothing architectures of the cloud for speed, and let's rely on master data management, good data governance, data dictionaries, data catalogs, to really focus on the true problem of getting at the truth, which is not a technological problem, but it's really one of storing and managing metadata. So let's look at a high level. What are the differences between the data warehouse and a data lake and an MDM? Well, data warehouse is typically viewed as high stakes, all or nothing. We'll take requirements, we'll figure it out, we'll get back to you in a few months. data lake and MDM solution is much more incremental. Get something out there kind of working, improve it over time. Data warehouse is top-down centralized. Data lake is collaborative, democratized, federated. Data warehouse generally is designed to be perfect. Data lake is pretty good with some messiness. There may be some messiness in the data. But I do not think that data lake is the same thing as a data swamp. A data swamp is what you get when you take a good data lake and you don't have good data governance. Data warehouse centralized responsibility. Data lake is data owners and users are responsible and accountable. Speed is critical for data warehouse with a focus on that. Data lake is much more focused on speed being proportional to usage and need, and this can only be figured out once you get the data out there and you start to use it. So you can't just go and build it and then people will come to it. It's actually just something that you want to build it incrementally as you go along, as you learn about what's important and what's not. Data warehouse is hard to change. Data lakes are nimble and responsive. And then data warehouse has been, track, transform, load, schema on write. Let's get the perfect data model. And once we've got that, then we'll just keep feeding the data warehouse. And the data lake is like, let's get the stuff in there. Let's see what it looks like. Let's see how people use it. Let's mine it a little bit. And let's worry about the structure of it as we read it. Once we read it and we figure out that there's a good structure to use, we can bake that in. But let's figure it out first, not just assume that we know what it is a priori. So the data lake deniers, Dwayne Washington is following up after me, will probably argue that you must have a data model, and I say sure. But the reality is the data model is oftentimes tied to the technology, the architecture, about speed, and by far more important is the semantics, not the syntax of the data. The data addiction and the data governance focus on those first and get started with a pretty good data model and then modify it over time. Other argument is, well, you have to have pre-compile the data, you have to pre-aggregate in order to get the fast response, and I just say, absolutely, but only do that after you know what data is important. Ignore the other stuff. You're not going to be able to get all of your data in perfect shape until you actually know how it's going to be used. And similar to the last one, you need to clean the data. Absolutely, but again, this last sentence there, push accountability upstream, I think is very, very important. Once your data lake is polluted, it's really too late. You don't have to clean that up. You need the folks who are providing you with the data to be accountable for the quality of that data, and that's all about data governance. It's not really a technological thing. So in summary, completely changed metaphors here. 1990s, the data warehouse used to be the only thing on the plate. Big stake there. Today, though, I truly don't think the data warehouse goes away, but I think it's just one piece of many things on our plate, and we'll have to throw in some vegetables as well as the steak, and that's going to be our best solution. So with that, let me hand it off to Mr. Washington and see what his response will be.
All right, weighing in from this other corner down in Texas, the heartland, Dwayne Washington, the BI Pharaoh. Take it away.
Well, Steve, I want to say thanks, and Eric, thanks. I know Steve tried to throw me off with this last slide, knowing that I'm in Texas. We do everything big in Texas, and I love steak. And he really tried to throw me off and mess me up here and get me off my game because that steak looks great. But I will say, as I listen to Steve, and Steve's a good friend of mine, really, Steve's kind of proving my point, especially with the last statement that he made, is that I don't think the data warehouse is going away. It's just part of some other things that come into play. And I think that's right on point. So let me just stop for just a moment, kind of introduce myself for those that aren't aware of who I am. My name is Dwayne Washington, BI Pharaoh. I am the current CIO of the company called the Business of Intelligence. And just as the name portrays, what we do is business intelligence solutions around the world. So that's pretty much what we do. From my perspective, I'm also the author of a book called Get in the Stream, The Ultimate Guide to Customer Adoption. And for the past 25 years or so, I've been implementing business intelligence solutions across the world, from big companies like GTE and Verizon to healthcare companies to being head of technology for the National NAACP to most recently building out all the analytics at the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. So that's my background and actually doing the things that we're talking about. And so we're going to talk about today, and Steve, my good friend, kind of helped me out as far as what we're going to talk about, because as I listen to what he's saying, I want to say that sometimes things may change, but a lot of times they just stay more the same. For those that have been in this industry for a while, we've heard a lot of different terms. We've heard reporting back in the 90s. We heard DSS with decision support systems. We heard that term switch to BI and switch to analytics. Now we're hearing data science and big data, and really it's kind of all the same when you look at what you have to do and what you have to get done. And so as I put this together, I thought about something. First of all, the statement of, is the data warehouse dead, on one hand is an absurd question, but on the other hand, it actually shows me the mentality in the direction that our industry is going. So that's what makes what I'm about to say in the next few moments extremely important, because it could possibly change your entire department. So I prepared for this web conference, and something dawned on me, that the data warehouse that we're talking about is just like a marriage. And just like I said, I've been in this BI space for over 20 years, and on the other side of my life, I've been helping people with their marriages for just about the same amount of time. And so there are great marriages, and there are great data warehouses. And just like there are bad marriages and bad data warehouses. And I think what Steve laid out are some attributes of what a bad data warehouse is. So if we think about our marriage and even our data warehouse, if we think about our life in terms of select statements, select asterisk from wherever, where whatever, the question is, when you're looking at your implementation, what's your select statement? You know, are you selecting bad traits from bad marriages where people don't like each other? Are you selecting good tactics from good teams where the results are wonderful? Are you selecting good stuff from good people and making the thing move, and take an example of what people are doing on a positive light? Are you doing that? So let's dive into it for a moment. So when we look here, here we go. When we look here, Steve actually said something right on point. What was the promise? What was the original promise? And part of the issue with marriage and part of the issue with data warehouses is expectation. Think about it. We cannot be let down unless we have an expectation that's not being met. So let's look at the expectations of the promise. The promise would be, hey, this is going to be easy. This data warehouse is going to be simple. This marriage is going to be easy. All we got to do is go to the courthouse and sign a few papers. It'll be great. This data warehouse is going to be simple. We'll just throw a database up and data will just magically go to it. Now, if you've been married for longer than 15 minutes, if you've had a data warehouse with at least one customer, you'll know one thing. It ain't easy. So somebody lied to you if they told you that it'll be automatic and it'll be easy. It takes work. And I don't care how great your ETL routines are, it simply is not automatic. And so when we were told that it was easy and it's automatic, and we don't get that, that's breaking that promise. And I get that. So we were told also that there's only one way of looking at a problem. There's only one solution. You know, if you think about your own self, you probably disagreed with yourself before. I'm sure I have, looking back on some decisions that I've made in the past, and maybe I would do things differently if I knew then what I know now, which means that I'm disagreeing with my own self, which means that there is more than one way to look at the same problem. So we were told that, hey, we're going to put this thing in place and it's going to have a single version of the truth. And for 25 years, people have been looking for the single version of the truth. So we were told to go looking for that, but that was not a good expectation because, quite honestly, there's different truths from different people. Some people want the ROI based on sales. Some people want the ROI based on sales minus the commission. Others want how much did the ROI based on the increase of customer service scores. Things are just different. There are different questions for different people. And so assuming that everything's going to be the same, for example, revenue versus EBITDA versus I want revenue just minus the taxes, there's a lot of different questions to ask. And if we go into it with there's only one way to look at it, that's a misplaced expectation and you're going to fail. So if you want a great marriage, you're also going to need some other things. You're going to need training. You can't do it alone, especially if you've never seen this thing done right. So you have to be trained to flip burgers, if you think about it. If you start at McDonald's tomorrow, they're going to train you on how to flip burgers, which is not that difficult. So if you're going to build something like a marriage or you're going to build something like a data warehouse, you're going to need to get some help. You're not going to be able to do this by yourself. So BI and data warehouses are no different. You were told, hey, you can do this alone. In some cases, I've seen people being told, you don't even need IT to get this thing built. You're also told, you don't have to have a plan. It'll just work out. All different types of claims. You just take your data and throw it at this tool, and it'll just all work out. So the question is, when did that ever work? Right? Think about it. When have you ever been able to take data and just throw it at a particular tool and have that tool do exactly what you want it done without any type of intervention? And quite honestly, sometimes we're being sold tools these days that the claim is just the same. And once again, we're talking about the data warehouse as it relates to marriages and things that we need to make it work right, and the problem of when it worked wrong. So here we see the work that needs to be put in. First of all, if you're going to have a great marriage or if you're going to have a great data warehouse, you have got to plan, period. So if you have the same amount of data in one place as you do another, if you have, for example, you're an airport and you have concessionaires and a concessionaire name is in 5 of your different systems, you need to know where those systems are. You need to know what that's called in these different systems, and you need to be able to bring that together and plan for that. You're also going to need some training. A lot of times people just want to implement the BI solution just haphazardly. We just want to go ahead and start. We don't need to be trained. We don't need people in to show us how to do this. We don't need mentoring. We don't need to see how other people have done it properly. We're just going to go for it. And a lot of the problems that Steve actually brought out are a direct result of lack of planning, lack of training, and lack of mentoring, and especially this last one, picking the right team. Once again, we know exactly what that looks like in marriages, because in proper marriages they have all 4, but when we start with that very last one, marrying the right person is paramount. So just like on your BI team, you need to make sure you're marrying the right people. You need to make sure that you have the right team members. All too often what we'll do is we'll take one full-time employee and we'll say, spend half of your time on building this data warehouse out. Just spend a piece of your time doing it. We won't even hire a full-time FTE. And it doesn't matter even if the person that you're getting is the wrong person to begin with. So just like we would take care in the person that we're going to marry, we need to take care in the person that we pick on these particular teams. Steve outlined it great. A lot of the problems that we're seeing are not technical problems. So why would the data warehouse ever be dead if the issue isn't a technical issue? The issue is one of the things that we're outlining now. For example, take your time when you're picking your team. You want to pick someone that's hungry, pick someone that's humble, pick someone that is socially smart. Take your time and give them your time and the attention they need to be able to succeed. These things are going to take you to the next level with your BI implementation and ultimately your data warehouse. Now, as far as the shortcut, good data warehouses do take time. Now, they are evergreen. They will change over time. I don't know any data warehouse I've ever built that was meant to be built and just left alone. It's meant to be able to change over time, but there are no shortcuts. I'm going to say that again. There are no shortcuts to being hard working and putting in the time that you need to be able to make it happen. Not saying it should take 2 years, but you need to take your time. You must put in the time and the attention that it takes. Now, this includes time spent with your customers to understand their desired outcomes even when they aren't able to articulate them themselves. Once again, that's extremely important. Spending time where they are, sitting where they're sitting, understanding where they're coming from. Because if you don't understand your customer, I don't care what type of solution that you're building, it's going to be the wrong one and not fit their needs. So you can't take any shortcuts. There are times when there are some things that allow you to go directly to the source and skipping a data warehouse. Now, sometimes this is optimal. For example, you may not want to store a bunch of information regarding the weather inside of your data warehouse because you can just use an API and call it from a third party very easily. But you need to be extremely careful with that. You know, just as you're seeking somebody outside of your marriage could be detrimental, seeking data outside of your data warehouse could be catastrophic. It could impede your source system. And Steve brought this up as far as source systems back in the day being slow, and now they're being a lot faster. I want you to think about something. When you think about a data warehouse and a BI implementation, this means that we're going to hand a tool to maybe thousands of individuals and say, hey guys, you can run whatever query that you want to at whatever time that you want to, as many times as you want to run it. Do you want that running against your system that is, let's just say, taking care of your parking customers, or taking care of your flight data, or taking care of the customers that are taking care of the system that is keeping your cell phone service running? Do you really want all of those queries hitting that same front-end system? Probably not. So you're going to need some separation there. So you've got to be able to say, does this make sense or does it not? And so you could also end up with data quality issues as they arise as well, because if you're not cross-referencing that data somewhere, you're going to have an issue. So for example, once again, you've got 5 source systems and you have the same information in 5 different systems. However, you haven't brought them together anywhere. You haven't modeled that anywhere. So in your data lake, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment, in your data lake, it can be extremely difficult to know that's the same person, the same company, or the same customer across all those different data sources. You're going to need to take some time, all right? So these days, there's a lot of tools that are extremely powerful. They're so powerful, we all know, and I'm talking about OLAP tools, they can actually cover up for bad design, and in some cases, no design. However, there is no substitute for good design. And I can hear my old-timers on the phone right now just jumping up and down, screaming like, hey, somebody said it. There is no substitute for good design. My good friend Ted Hills, he has his Twitter handle is Model It All, and I'm with him. There's no substitute for that. These types of shortcuts can lead to bad joins, slow queries, and wrong answers as it relates to that. So it's like, I want you to think about trying to buy your wife's affection to cover up the fact that you hadn't been present or you're not doing the right things in your marriage. Sooner or later, these things are going to catch up with you. Right. So let's move on to the frustration, because a lot of times people have situations where they're just frustrated. They're frustrated in their bad marriages and they're frustrated in their bad data warehouses. That can actually make you want to quit. It can make you look for other options, and it can make you never want to start again. I want you to think about something. Just because the marriage is bad, just because you've seen it not work out, just because you've seen someone not do the proper thing, does that mean that marriage in general is dead? Does that mean that nothing will ever work out because you've seen it not work out in this one particular situation? I would say that a lot of situations and problems that Steve brought out he's right on the money. However, he's on the money for bad data warehouse implementations. You're right. If you built it to not be evergreen, you're going to have an issue. You're right. If people couldn't decide on what the metrics are, you're going to have a problem. It has nothing to do with the data warehouse. Just as marriages go, if you're not doing the right thing in your marriage, it's going to fail. You've got to put in the time. You've got to put in the care. You've got to put in the feeding. And yes, when you get frustrated, it makes you want to quit. Let me go to another solution. Let me just pick up a new tool. Just like in a marriage, well, let me get rid of this wife or let me get to this husband and go on to the next one. Just as marriages, second and third marriages fail in a greater percentage than the first one, second and third data warehouse implementations fail as well if people don't learn the lessons that we're teaching on today. You don't want to go looking for a bunch of different options. What you want to do is make sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing in the option that you're currently in. Let's take a look at some pitfalls. And this is extremely important. We talked a little about the wrong people in the wrong place. And so I want to focus the next thing on the data lakes. Now, once again, people have been talking about this for a long time. And one thing has led to another, and people say data lakes are the way to go. Some people say they're not. Some people say they're data swamps. Or what I want to do, in the interest of making sure we're all on the same level, I want to make sure that we all are talking from the same place, and I want to just take a moment out to explain what we mean when we say data lake. Now, if you have data that is coming from your source system onto your enterprise data warehouse, your EDW, you want to grab it from that source system as quickly as you possibly can because you don't want to impact that source system. And so it's a place that you want to put it. And so once you get it to that place, you may want to do some type of calculation on it, whether it's using conform dimensions or whatever. Maybe you have some rules that you're putting on that data to be able to clean it up, some MDM strategies that you're doing here, and there's no issue with that. And so to move from one place to another, you have a place that's in the middle, and that place is in the middle is the data lake. And that data lake has been called a lot of different things. Some people have called it a staging area or a landing area. It's the same place. Now, the issue, though, is that people are starting saying, hey, look, let's get data directly from there. Now, that's very, very dangerous. That's very dangerous. And I'm not saying there's never a time to do it, but it's extremely dangerous because that data is in transit, right? It's not cleaned up. It's not done. That's the whole purpose of it being there. It's just going there as quickly as possible. I want you to think about it once again in terms of marriage. Think about every time you had a problem with your spouse that you called your mother-in-law or you called your mother in every single problem in your marriage before you even gave it a chance to work through it, while it's still in the process. Now, that's a bad idea for your marriage, right? And it's a bad idea for your BI solutions as well. If you think about your data lake, while things are not clean, the only people you want in there are experts. There may be some data scientists that are able to get through the muddiness of that and get out some important information, just as there are people in marriage that are trained to go and deal with your marriage in the middle of the issues and problems. But you don't want to have that available to everybody else. The data's not clean, it's not conformed yet, so only those trained individuals should be messing with that mess, right? So you want to make sure that as you go through your data lakes, you're not giving people, just random people, access to the data lake, because you're going to have more problems than you can shake a stick at. Now you've got to be able to answer issues and problems with people having bad queries because they didn't write the query properly, because they didn't understand the structures that are there. You're going to have situations where there are no conform dimensions. So, you know, back to the airport example, you have terminal 1, 2, and 3 over here. You have terminal dash 1, 2, and 3 over here. You have something different in the third one, and nothing's bringing it all together. It's going to confuse your user. Remember that the purpose of the EDW to begin with was to bring all the data together to make it easier for the customer. Quite honestly, right now, BI teams are being replaced by certain tools because individuals are saying, I want it easy, man. I just want to click a button and have it. They don't want to do more work. They want to do less work. So let's be able to help them out. So in conclusion, what are the results? What are the benefits? Well, if we have a good marriage and we have good data warehouse, we have an informed, well-oiled, purpose-driven company, which that's the purpose at the end of the day, that knows where they've been, they know where they're going, and they know how to get there. They're created, not born. They have repeatable results. And just like we say, happy wife, happy life, remember, happy database, happy workplace. So make sure you're doing all the things that you need to do to make sure you have a phenomenal data warehouse. And no, the data warehouse isn't bad. We've seen a lot of bad implementations, just like there are bad marriages. But should we say, let's never get married because it went the wrong way? Should we throw the baby out with the bathwater? Should we take all data warehouses out because some are bad and didn't live up to the promise that was in our head? Or should we say, let's live and learn, and let's do like good marriages and make good databases, right? Because some of these things we're going to need for the rest of life. So, in conclusion, the data warehouse is not dead, it's alive and thriving.
All right, that's an excellent counterpoint. I'm going to try to go ahead and synthesize some of the stuff, then we're going to hear from Praveen, and we'll have a little Q&A. We have some fantastic questions coming in from the audience already, so thank all of you very much for that. Let me go ahead and take back the keys to the WebEx. And Wayne Eckerson, our good buddy and founder of the Eckerson Group, has put together a couple of quick slides here that I'll just talk about. You can kind of see the metaphor we're throwing out here about how data swamps occur and why you want to avoid getting too far down the line without having thought through this stuff. Now, to some of the points already made today, there are lots of new ways of dealing with the organizational issues of a data lake. right? I think it's a bit of a misconception that you can just start throwing data into a large lake, if you will, and just get some value from it. But data catalogs are coming along very quickly, and they're really moving along in a very efficient manner, I would have to say. And they do what I think is the best thing to do, which is they scan through your data and they incrementally allow you to piece together a sort of rubric to understand what's really going on in there. They use these catalog technology to identify metadata and to find alignment between different information systems and different bits and pieces throughout your environment. But I think the bottom line, if you think about these two solutions, they're very complementary. So traditional data warehousing, obviously you have business people using the results that have been highly engineered. I think that's one of the key differences between data warehouses and data lakes, is that a lot of engineering went into the relational model to be able to deliver data very quickly. But the thing to remember again is those constraints. All those constraints have changed now. We have a different set of requirements around data lakes. But I think if you really step back and take a look at this, they're complementary. These are not really competing technologies. I think part of the challenge in nailing all this stuff down, frankly, emanated from a lot of the messaging that came out of the early data lake vendors, companies like Cloudera and Hadoop and Hortonworks with Hadoop implementations. I think, and I've talked to quite a few analysts in the space and quite a few vendors as well, I think what happened is the folks at those companies wanted to achieve a big vision around analytics and around doing analytics a different way, around being able to do business analytics using a lot of different kinds of data. And I think they were very hopeful and a very good vision that they had, but they tried to pin it too much to the data warehousing concept. That mind share around what data warehousing delivered to the business, I think, was not quite accurate. And so we wound up with some competing visions about what to actually do, when in reality these are different things, they're different animals, and they work in different ways. So you can see some more context on that slide there. And then if you think about these are just the different ways you can bring them together, right? You can have a distinction between data lake and data warehouse. You can have a virtual environment. You can have it subsumed basically or native. I think at the end of the day what you really want is to have your data lake for broader business analytics and exploration. You want to have your data warehouse more for your deterministic numbers. How much did we make? How much profit did we generate from this region, from that region? All the traditional stuff that we use data warehouses for, we should still use data warehouses for, but the data lake can provide the context. And it's almost like a proving ground for data and an exploratory environment, a sandbox, if you will, for understanding the bigger picture around your data. So you do want to use both of these things and just, as they say, horses for courses. You want to use the right tool in the right time for the right purpose and understand, again, the data warehouse, that's the deterministic numbers, what you report by, what you say for sure to the board of directors and to your customers and your shareholders and so forth, you're actually delivering in terms of financial value, for example, whereas the data lake is much more stochastic in nature. It's much more exploratory. It's for trying to understand new opportunities. And at some point, maybe you take something you gleaned from your data lake environment and analytics, and you bake that back into the warehouse. And understand that warehousing is changing itself. This is a real big distinction now. And to give you some advice from an old friend of mine, use the data lake, and just being very practical here, to put pressure on your vendors to lower the costs for the technology. Costs are coming down. If you look at what Amazon does with Redshift and other vendors like Snowflake out there are doing, they're really throwing down the gauntlet on what data warehousing costs. And that's a big deal because 10 years ago, data warehouses were extremely expensive. They really should not be anymore. And I would encourage attendees on this call to share with your colleagues, use that pressure, use that leverage to get a better deal on your data warehousing technology so you can use both of these. So with that, I'm actually going to hand it off to Praveen of Impetus Technologies, who can give us some perspective from their viewpoint. And with that, Praveen, take it away.
Thanks, Eric. I hope my audio is loud and clear.
You're a little bit soft, so just speak a little bit louder.
All right. Thanks, Eric. So let me first introduce where am I coming from. I run a company called Impetus Technologies, and we are in the business of providing solutions and services to Fortune 100 companies, mainly for managing their data and also creating analytics use cases. Right from simple machine learning use cases to, in some cases, leveraging deep learning technologies. And we put about 300 use cases in production across the Fortune 500 so far in our short journey. And I have a very unique perspective on this. I agree with a lot of things that all the wise men before me have said today. And yet I want to draw the attention of the audience to another problem, which is more in the domain of business. This is not a bits and bytes problem. I think if we were to argue only in the plane of bits and bytes, then I'll ask a simple question to the audience. If I had the fortune of creating a Fortune 100 company today, will I be choosing an enterprise data warehouse, or will I go with something newer? I don't even need to answer this. Answer is really clear. But I think it's a function of who you are and what challenges you're up against. And who you are, where you are, and from there, what is the least disruptive path to really dealing with the real challenge in the marketplace. And I'm going to draw my everybody's attention to what I believe is a real challenge. So there's a real crisis in the for the Fortune 500 companies. There are new invaders, and I have you see pictures of a few of these invaders. These are people who had no backgrounds in the industries they're really winning hands down in. They've come in and they've just conquered these spaces, and they're trying to conquer new areas. They're getting into automobiles. They're getting into space exploration. You name it. They're getting into getting groceries to my household in 2 hours. What are they bringing to the table? They're bringing a lot of things. They're able to take a fresh look at supposedly boring state spaces and really recreate them, reinvent them, bring new efficiency. They operate at velocities that the traditional Fortune 500 hasn't been used to operating at for a long time. Cash is not a problem for them. And they don't have legacy silos in their organization. They're not suffering from the same politics of silos. I sometimes like to remind myself that the most efficient business is a one-man operation where all the information has to flow inside one brain. But the moment you add another employee, you start having communication breakdowns. Now, I get it that a one-man operation is not scalable, so it has other challenges, but nevertheless, from an information flow perspective, it's extremely efficient. Now, these companies, getting back to these new invaders, they have a lot of talent. They can attract the talent they want. They can pay whatever amount of money needs to be paid. They've really taken the compensation levels that, I live in Silicon Valley, and what I thought was a standard has been completely shattered, and it's being shattered every 6 months. Look at some of the spaces, look at pharmacies. Some of the largest pharmacy companies in the country lost nearly 20% of their market capitalization the day Amazon announced a partnership with JP Chase and Warren Buffett. Look at a boring space of mattresses. I didn't think a venture capital finance company is going to come into mattresses. And I know of at least a couple of companies who together have revenues of $500 million. And these companies came into being less than 3 years ago. Groceries. Instacart is another company. Last I heard, they had a $3 billion market cap in the private markets. Look at, the taxi space. I don't need to say anything about this. So these invaders are becoming more and more lethal by the day. They're learning new spaces much faster than the incumbents and really threatening. And I browse through the attendee list. Most of the people I see are coming from what I would like to say the incumbent sector. established large companies. And I think all the, if you are from one such company, then, you know, this invasion is for real. These guys are also leveraging, they're all investing in AI at a massive level. And what do these AI models feed on? Data, rich and timely data. And I believe that these companies have a single logical unified data model across their enterprise. They're not dealing with this, you know, even if you go into the traditional world of enterprise data warehouses, I know it didn't look like a bunch of, you know, a data swamp like we know in the big data world, but it doesn't look pretty even if you go to those companies. I mean, I've run into companies with hundreds of silos, hundreds of data marts. I was speaking to one insurance company last year, and they said they had 3,800 different database instances running. Now, one can argue that, you know, each department needs its own store, and they can, what's wrong with the silos? Each silo is serving a certain function, certain department, certain work group. But the reality is there's only one CEO. And I think Steve alluded to this earlier, and I've heard this from other C-level executives before from large companies, that they cannot get one single answer. So I believe this is the real challenge. And then what does this mean to have a logical, single, unified data model for analyzing my information? It means I have a single glossary. I get the data as fast as it gets created. I have all the governance, all the guardrails. And it's easy and agile. Shouldn't take, if I need a new report, it should not take 3 weeks. And all my data is fully stitched together. And if I ask a question, how many Fortune 100 companies have this? And not that many. You remove the large tech companies, and outside of that, there are not that many companies who can even boast of being close. So I feel this is the clear and present danger. This is what we need to be talking about. And it's not about the bits and bytes of, you know, where we store our data. The real challenge is, are we going to be able to analyze all our data logically together or not? Because if a company cannot do this, then they will not be able to, they'll be flying blind or half blind. This is a massive responsibility on the, you know, the C-suite and for the boards. And lastly, I'll say that this is the destination that we ought to be talking about, not the means. Whether a company can get to this destination by way of EDW, so be it. So what if it's going to cost 5 times more? But I think each company ought to look at the kind of data they have, the volume, the velocity of data, and if they're already in flight with EDWs, and if it can take them there, so be it. And then if not, then they need to look at alternatives. And my company is in the business. We are benefiting from people migrating out of enterprise data warehouses because we have some automated tools to migrate. But each company ought to look at, there is a disruption. Nobody can argue that there is no disruption in migrating out. And is the disruption worth it, or is fighting this larger battle of keeping your business relevant and as smart as possible so that it can defend itself from all kinds of competitors? Eric, this is what I had to say today.
Okay, good. And folks, we have some really good questions from you out there. I'd like to go ahead and bring the panel back and maybe address some of these. I think this is one of the best questions I've seen so far, although they're all very good. But there's a question that has an interesting angle on it here, and I'd like to go around the room. I'll throw it over first to Steve, and then Dwayne, and then Praveen, feel free to comment on this. Here's the question. How have new data lake technologies changed the process of building a data warehouse? Since the largest cost factor is in the data integration, cleansing, standardizing, et cetera, expediting and lowering the cost of that is more important than the lower platform cost overall. Well, this is very interesting. So the short question is, how has data lake technology changed data warehouse design? Stephen, what do you think about that?
Great question. I haven't heard that one before. It's tremendously helped the data warehouse. The whole idea of the data lake is get the data in there, learn about the data before you start to make big design decisions. So now we see companies that can get their data into the data lake, they can start to play with it, they can start to understand it, and when they do build their big data model for the data warehouse, it's much more likely to be correct on the first try.
Yeah, that sounds great. And Dwayne, I'll throw it over to you as well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worked great. I mean, now you're looking at, back in the day, it'd take, 2 or 3 days to do a query. You set it off over the weekend, it comes back on Monday. Now you can load a petabyte of data and fairly quickly and begin to take a look at it so that you know what needs to go in a data warehouse or not. And so I think that number one, the breadth of the tools, being able to bring in more information, more disparate information like social media and that kind of thing, and bring it together, and being able to do it quicker allows you for more insight, so you know, hey, you can be a better customer to your customer and say, hey, these are the types of questions that we can answer inside of a data warehouse. So, yeah, I think it's just making it gold.
Okay, that's good. We got a bunch of other questions here. One of the questions revolves around building a data warehouse inside of a data lake. I think that would be your bottom right-hand corner here, native. Maybe, Praveen, I'll throw it over to you for some thoughts first about how data lake technology has changed data warehouse design and thought processes, and then what about this synthesized approach where you literally build from the ground up a data warehouse that sits inside of a data lake? What do you think about that, Praveen?
No, absolutely. It's absolutely spot on, this thought, and I'm seeing this actually happen in a lot of advanced companies. But going back to the earlier question, Eric, I'm seeing companies, the board see some risk with the data lakes because it's kind of a wild west where order is settling in, but it's still the bleeding edge. So I'm seeing a lot of companies choose or keep their compliance and risk use cases on the existing data warehouses. These are mature, stable environments, proven, and doing the newer use cases on data lake. Now, coming back to this question, can a data warehouse exist inside, the paradigm of a data warehouse exist inside a data lake? Absolutely. In fact, actually, there are a lot of benefits if one can migrate all their data, the single source of truth, so to speak, onto a data lake. And if you have all the governance structures in place, then, there are, you can also solve your consumption problem from the same data lake. You don't have to have 40 or 100 or 3,800 different instances to go query. You can actually have, there are BI technologies which can work at enterprise scale out of data lakes. I'm involved with one called Kairos, and, it can serve queries in single-digit seconds from all kinds of BI tools. So I think I'm seeing a massive transformation on the consumption side as well.
Well, that's a very interesting point you just brought up, because what Kairos does, as I understand it, is they are literally building cubes on top of a data lake, right? So they're taking the cube concept and thought process and porting it over to the data lake environment, which is interesting. What do you think about that approach in general?
I have a vested interest, Eric, so I'll argue all day long for it.
Okay.
But I'm seeing phenomenal technical benefits and cost benefits. But the biggest benefit, which most companies don't calculate, and I sometimes struggle to even get this point across, is the saving in human time. I've run into companies with 15,000 people hitting one massive BI fabric, and if 15,000 people are filing at least 10 queries a day, and if I can save 5 seconds on a query, I mean, you can start doing the math. It adds up to a serious amount of money. So the cost of keeping people waiting and disrupting their chain of thought, because I, as a human being, you show me the hourglass for 3 seconds and I'm going to alt tab to doing something else. I'll check my email or what have you.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
That's a productivity gain.
Yeah, sure. Let me go ahead and bring Stephen and Dwayne back in. We'll go just a couple minutes long because we have so many good questions here. We have a couple folks saying that you really should take some of the insights that you glean from your data lake and bake that into your data warehouse. I think that does make sense. And, you know, frankly, early on in this whole ball game, before we even talked too much about data lakes, way back in something like 2012 maybe, or 13, I had Tassos Argyris on DM Radio, a show that I do, a weekly radio show, and he threw out the idea of using the data lake as your ingestion mechanism. And so the data lake it will be the first place that all data lands, and then from there you start pulling it into a data warehouse. That's a pretty interesting architecture, it seems to me, and it would allow you to solve maybe some of those painful problems around the old world way of using ETL to pull data into a data lake. Of course, a number of vendors have done some really interesting stuff in leveraging, especially the second iteration of the Hadoop ecosystem, which uses Yarn. That's yet another resource negotiator. That Yarn-based approach is pretty clever, and there are some vendors that did some really cool stuff around really expediting and parallelizing ETL. So let me throw it over to Stephen Smith first, and then Dwayne, and then Praveen. What do you think about that concept of using the data lake as your landing zone for data and then moving it from there into a warehouse?
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good idea. I just quibble a little bit with the language of and then moving it into a warehouse. I think my synthesis view, colored by, Dwayne's excellent arguments and also other folks who responded to my blog article, I think the synthesis, it's almost like we're arguing about should we have a disk on our computer or memory? It's like, well, there's no argument there. You need both. So you do need things that are precompiled and that go into your memory that's fast, right? Those are your star schema, your snowflakes. You know what you want to have in there, but that doesn't mean that you wouldn't also have the data lake or, in our analogy, a disk to kind of also store it. So I think, to me, the data lake is the new repository of the data. Again, it's clean. It's got good data governance. And guys, GDPR hits, this is the privacy regulation in Europe, on May 25th. That is going to have profound implications on the governance you need to do on all of your data. And it's going to require the data lake to be spiffy clean and really understand what data is in it. I think the data warehouse then is kind of like a compiled version of some of the data. You just need to know what it is. And I think the thing I would just continue to argue about is this idea of we're going to get really smart people together in a room, come up with a data model, and it's going to be an awesome data warehouse. I think that model is dead. I think that's gone. I think just like software has changed from a waterfall model to an agile iterative model based on what's needed and a triage model of you do the most important thing first, I think that's where kind of data storage overall, data management is headed.
Okay, good. And Dwayne, Washington, what do you think about this idea of using, using a data lake as the landing area and then feeding your data warehouse?
Well, Eric, every single data warehouse I've built in my entire career follows that model. Going all the way back to the 90s, like the name data lake wasn't around. Sometimes we called it a landing area. Sometimes we called it a staging area, but every single one of them followed that model. Information came out of the source system. It went into a interim system, and there was sometimes only one version of the data there. Sometimes there was two, because sometimes we had just a strict dump of what was in the source system, and it served a couple of different purposes. Number one, it gave you the structures of the original data source. Also, if there was any issue, you wouldn't have to query the original source to see the issue. You can see the data quality issue right there. And sometimes there was actually a secondary copy of the data that showed the staged data prior to going inside the EDW. So you could look inside the data lake or staging area or landing area and be able to see both without going to the EDW or without going to the source system. So, of course, I agree with that because every single one I've ever built follows that exact same model.
Okay, good. Praveen, what do you think about that concept?
Eric, I like to, as a designer, I would like fewer moving parts. If I have to move data again and again, I inherently don't like it. But, you know, it all depends on one situation. If my consumption use cases are working very well off my data lake, my data warehouse, and if my data warehouse is running out of capacity to process, pre-process, or clean the data, then, you know, maybe it makes sense. But I'll have to wait. There is a con of I'm creating IT operational overhead of running this, you know, this landing and then moving pipeline. Does it outweigh the consumption use cases which are stable and running well off my data warehouse? So, but all said, it's still an interim solution.
Okay, good. We have a bunch of great comments here, folks, and I think I'm going to have to wrap up here in just a second, but I'll throw in just a couple comments from the audience, which are kind of interesting, and maybe we'll just get quick comments on them. One of the attendees writes, a few weeks ago I coined the term data lake house in an attempt to summarize a discussion similar to this one. The term, I think, pretty much summarizes the options that we've talked about today. And then someone else was commenting, I thought this was actually pretty clever as well. Some attendee commented, the old Kimball data warehouse methodology promoted a bottom-up approach, which made building an enterprise data warehouse much more manageable. In my 25 years in the industry, I've seen very few organizations apply this approach correctly. Maybe just final comments from Steve Smith and then Praveen, and then, I'm sorry, Steve Smith and Dwayne and Praveen. Steve, thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's just the right thing to do. But human nature and organizations such as they are, you know, it's just, there's so many things that push you in the direction of trying to build the thing right the first time, top down. So again, once again, it's not a technology, it's not even a data problem. It's really an organizational and a cultural problem. But I didn't know that, but that makes a tremendous amount of sense. I mean, it's very, very smart. Look at your data first before you start to build your data warehouse.
Yep, Dwayne, comments from you?
I'm absolutely on board with that. Of course, you know, I wrote the book, Get in the Stream, you know, Your Ultimate Guide to Customer Adoption. It's all about really go to the customer first and find out what's even important. You know, what before you start talking data, start talking schemas and everything else, what's important to the customer? What's going to, can you answer the question of how much the company should make tomorrow? Is that important for the CEO? And then you backfill that with technology, saying how do we support those particular questions. And so I think that if we begin with the business in mind, whatever technology needs to be implemented to make that happen, I believe we'll be successful. I think a lot of people kind of take the opposite approach and saying, hey, this technology is cool, let's go use this. You know, cloud makes sense in a lot of different situations, or Hadoop may make sense, or, you know, using a database as a service may make sense, but it only makes sense if it answers the customer's question and problem. So I think that the impetus should be on, let's focus on what are the problems and questions from a business perspective, and then outfit that with your data warehouse, your data lake, or whatever your implementation is.
That's a great segue to our friend Praveen from Impetus. Final comments from you, Praveen?
I think you have to have both bottom-up and top-down approaches in play simultaneously. You don't want only top-down because that will stifle, you know, newer emerging business groups in a large company because they'll have to fit into an existing model. And the problem with any data model that you define is it starts becoming obsolete a second after you define it. So they have a half-life, which is not very long because business is not stable. I mean, the business models are constantly changing and evolving, whether a business sees the changes or not in time. But at the same time, if I go look from a CEO's perspective, they see a top-down view of the business, and at times they don't even have a means to apply a top-down. They don't even have a way to measure their business from the top. So we have to be sensitive to every perspective, and so both approaches have to be in play. And there's another thing I would like to bring in. No model, as I said, no model is static, and you have to keep looking at and categorizing what is not working about your model. So the theory of creative destruction has to be applied constantly.
I agree. Well, folks, we burned through an hour and 11 minutes here. Fantastic conversation, a lot of wonderful comments here. And remember, this is just the beginning of a whole series. We have at least 4 of these scheduled, so we're going to be looking for you on our next events coming up. We got several of them planned, and we'd love to get your input. This is an interesting dialectic. That's the whole idea here. So big thanks to our friends from Impetus. Big thanks, of course, to Stephen Smith and Dwayne Washington of Eckerson Group. And yours truly, I always say thank you for all your time and attention, folks. We do archive all these webcasts for later viewing. It's usually up within about a day, so you can hop online to insideanalysis.com and look for that archive link. And with that, we're going to bid you farewell, folks. Thanks for enjoying yourselves, and thanks for engaging in the dialectic. We'll talk to you next time, folks. Bye-bye.